us about this molecule, which sounds fascinating.
It's actually mind-boggling. So, back in 1985, three scientists here in Houston, that's where I'm based, they were at Rice University, discovered the third form of carbon. And the most abundant of the third whole kind of collection of carbon molecules is the one I'm holding up now. So if you're listening, don't worry, just imagine a soccer ball where the lines on the soccer ball represent the bonds between the carbon atoms. So we have a spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. That molecule is amazing for industrial applications. It makes better inks, better batteries, better tires, better photocells. This is where people start getting nervous because we're talking about a supplement. And usually you don't think about better inks, batteries, tires, and photocells when you're thinking about a supplement. By the way, I didn't mention those scientists discovered it in 1985 and then won the Nobel Prize for that discovery in 1996. So this is a Nobel Prize winning. I mean, technically the molecule can't win a Nobel Prize, but like the sentiment is still the same. So the molecule is great for industrial applications. It's an amazing molecule. It actually has six-fold symmetry. So there's six planes through the soccer ball shape where it's symmetrical. What that means is it's incredibly resilient, where you can fire most molecules at about 15,000 miles an hour at steel. They'll just shred apart. This one, by the way, this is how I picture it, just kind of compresses and bounces right back. That's how resilient it is. And they actually thought, you'll recognize this shape. This shape on the exterior of the cage, one of the facets of that soccer ball, looks like benzene. Now, benzene is ubiquitous for our society. We don't have modern society without benzene. In fact, if you just glance around and think, well, that's plastic, it doesn't exist without benzene, like that's how important benzene is. Also in detergents and fuels, all sorts of things. But benzene is a known toxic material and known to be carcinogenic. So for that reason, they assumed this soccer ball caged molecule would be toxic. So they put it in a toxicity study. And in that study, they gave test subjects, in this case, it was Wistar rats, water as the control group, olive oil as another kind of pseudo control group, and then olive oil with this molecule. And we call it ESS60 if you're going to consume it. So with ESS60 in it. And again, this was a toxicity study. Instead of being toxic, the test subjects that they gave the olive oil with ESS60, really the MyVitalC formula, lived 90% longer than the control group. So you're right, the single longest longevity experimental result in history. The reason it's a surprisingly large number for you, the next best research way to live longer is calorie restriction, right? If you reduce your calorie consumption by 30%, you can extend your life by 30%. I call that the starve yourself 1/3 to death diet. And nobody signs up for that. Like you petition and maybe they need a marketing twist. But think about the contrast. You're talking about reducing your calorie consumption by 30%, right? Starving, versus adding this to your current kind of nutrition protocol. And yes, it's in rats, and so we've got more research to do, but the testimonials and the kind of logical science behind it kind of makes sense that this has this positive impact.
Hmm. Okay, so do we know why? What's so special about this molecule?
So other than we're talking about something, it's really amazing because you can fire it at a plate of steel and then it won't shatter. That's special, but not the reason that it's useful in a supplement, right? From the early days, back in 1991, really, we knew that this molecule could hold up to 6 negatively charged particles. In fact, someday there'll probably be a battery. This molecule is kind of colloquially known as a buckyball. It'll be very cool to have Bucky batteries, just because that sounds really cool. And it's a molecule I've been working with for 32 years. But we know it can hold 6 negatively charged particles, right? So you're in the industry, you're like, oh, that sounds like a reactive oxygen species sponge, right? So we know that it can hold that. And in fact, when I share the story about these test subjects living longer, and people ask, okay, what is the mechanism? Well, the medical community kind of thinks of aging in two regards, right? One of them is an oxidative process, and one of them is an inflammation process. In fact, inflammation is so key, it's called inflammaging now, right? Like that's how important it is. So we tick off both of those boxes, and I have to be careful with one. But knowing that this can hold 6 negatively charged particles, we know that it's going to be a good antioxidant. And in fact, there's peer-reviewed published research that shows it to be 125 times more powerful than vitamin C. There's an ad hoc study on the web that shows it to be 172 times more powerful than vitamin C. So we check that antioxidant box. The next one is anti-inflammatory, and you have to be extremely careful. The FDA has really decided that when you're speaking about inflammation, you're speaking about disease, right? They're equate. You can't say, oh, I address inflammation, because that means you're addressing Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease, can't like all of these diseases of inflammation. What we're allowed to say, what the FDA allows us to say, is that we address inflammation at least as it relates to exercise-induced inflammation, right? So where does the medical community sit between like exercise-induced inflammation and actually acute or chronic inflammation? We can talk about that a little, but we can't, like the FDA doesn't allow us to say that it addresses this chronic inflammation. I can kind of wrap this up to say that the product fits perfectly in the Mediterranean diet, this anti-inflammatory diet known with the blue zone people, right? Associated with the blue zone people who tend to live longer, tend to have less incidences of strokes, less incidences of cardiovascular disease. And so we do fit in that diet. So those are the two keys. Now I'm gonna blow your mind away here, because we're going to go back to the antioxidant, because this is a theory, and I'll tell you the supporting research that's the research that supports it. So we call it BOSS, the buffering oxidative stress system, right? Already sounds like it's amazing. We know from peer-reviewed published research that this molecule gets into the mitochondria, right? So we know it's one of those few antioxidants that can get into the mitochondria. Typically, you've got glutathione and melatonin. What we think this does is act like a paddy wagon, right? So I use the example, imagine you're on Bourbon Street, it's the end of Mardi Gras, and you've got the drunken reactive oxygen species messing up the cars and tearing down the light poles and all this stuff. And you have the police, the glutathione and the melatonin, coming to those reactive oxygen species, handcuffing them and getting them off the street, right? That's their job. But if they get overwhelmed and you run out of glutathione and melatonin, what do? That's when those reactive oxygen species continue to do oxidative damage, oxidative stress in the system. That's where this molecule comes in and acts like a paddy wagon. Now, you can visualize that they go inside, but they don't. They just get attached to the exterior. And so this can hold on to those reactive oxygen species, preventing them from doing any damage, while that mitochondria replenishes the glutathione and melatonin so that they can then handcuff themselves from that paddy wagon, from that ESS60 molecule, and then get them out of your system or manage them safely. So those are the mechanisms that we're thinking address. Now, I want to add one last thing. Before we kind of put these pieces together, our most consistent testimonial is that people take it in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night. Now, we know that sleep is positive for your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And if all we did was help people sleep better, then we would actually be helping, just their mental, physical, and emotional well-being. That's it. Just those things. And so that was really kind of the initial thought. And you think about it being a great mitochondrial support system that works in a way that we really don't have anything else that does. And that starts to piece all of these pieces together.